Okay, so yeah, so the problem was that I wasn't using. So once you containerize it, these are all going to be running on the same internal network, and Docker Compose will automatically map the name you give the container to like the IP address, basically. So for the host, that'll just be whatever name you give this container. All right. So that's now working. So this is all running in containers. So both applications are containerized. Okay, so at this point, we know that it works, and it works locally with Docker Compose. So we're going to deploy this. So one thing to keep in mind is that you have to run it, and then you have to make the migrations. Otherwise, the database basically won't exist. You'll have the Postgres container, but you won't have the database schemas that you expect. Okay, so I'm gonna spin this down. Since I didn't run it in detached mode, you can just do Control C. And what I'm going to do now is go through that process we've seen a couple times, where I'm going to create an EC2 instance and then copy some stuff over and run it. So here I am in my AWS console. I'm going to go to EC2, where you can type in EC2. And I'm going to launch an instance. Okay, and I'm going to use these default images. This is fine. This is fine. Key pair. You can use it if you have one already. You can use it. So I have a couple saved. But I'll create a new one. And this would be blah blah blah. API. Okay, so this is available. So now I'm gonna put this. Let's see. You shouldn't really do this in real life. So in real life, this would be something that you would never ever want anyone to see. I'm gonna put it in the git ignore, but really you should just keep it somewhere else. But just for convenience, I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna add a.
Can you put something like that in your environment folder or file?
You could, but it's really not something. Oh, so I already had that there. Let me undo this. Yeah, it's just something that you would probably just keep separate, because this doesn't have to do with your code at all. This just has to do with, this is like infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna do that, and then I have to modify the permissions of the PEM key. So if I go back to my, oh, I didn't want to. Okay, let's do that again. So this time, since I've just created it, I can select it. So API SSH. And then I'm gonna allow SSH traffic from my IP. You could do anywhere. We're not being secure right now. And then I'm gonna allow HTTP traffic. Although we're gonna have to modify this because for now we're gonna be running on port 8000. So if I wanted to use the default HTTP port 80, I could come in here and I could change this to 80. Eventually, we're not going to interact directly with this container. We'll have actually an Nginx container that will handle the initial request. But for now, this is what we're doing. And I'm going to launch the instance. And then once the instance is launched, we're going to have to go in and change the permissions to accept connections on port 8000. I'm going to go here to the instances and grab this one, and then go to security. And click on this security group. You see here are the two inbound rules. So we'll accept connections on port 2022. This is the SSH port from my IP address. And then we're also going to accept requests on port 80. But we're actually not using this port, so we need to add 8000 to this list. So we're going to click on security groups and inbound rules. We're going to edit those. And we're going to add a rule, which I'm just going to do all traffic. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to go back to the EC2 instance. Okay. And I can click on this. And then if I click on the connect thing, it's going to tell me, it's going to remind me basically that I need to modify the permissions for that PEM file. I'm going to do that. Okay. And then I can copy this. And here's the command that I will use to actually get in there. Yes. Okay, so now I'm SSH into the EC2 instance. So in order to run our application in EC2, we have to do a few things. One, we're going to have to install Docker and Docker Compose, and then also install Git so that we can pull down the repo. So I'm going to go back to get rid of this. Let's see. I'm just going to look for the lesson, the previous lesson that had that command there. Use this one. Yeah. I think that should work. Copy that. So all this is doing is installing Docker, Docker Compose, and then Git. We'll go here, and I'm going to install all that stuff on the EC2 instance. Okay, so now I'm going to just do a check to make sure everything is there. So git ---- version. Okay, I have Git installed. I'll do Docker ---- version. That's there. And then Docker Compose is a little tricky. So there's basically, you can either use Docker space compose or Docker -compose. And that has to do with the history of how Docker Compose was developed. But on Linux systems, you have to use Docker -compose. So Docker -compose version, and that is installed. So we have everything we need to actually run this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new commit with these changes. So git status And I will do, I'm going to add high cache. Okay. So git add, git, and I'll push it up. Okay. So now I'm going to clone this down. You can copy this. I'm going to clone. And I can go in here, cd wine API. I can do ls, and I have this run.sh, which I think should work. We'll see if it works. So /run.sh. So while this is getting going, I'm going to go to my EC2 instance and get the IP address of my right here. So I'm going to copy that. Then I can go into Postman and replace localhost with HTTP / this. And we are still running on port 8000, so we can leave that there. And then the migration should run. Okay. So this is something that might happen. So let's do Docker PS. So when you run Docker Compose, it will automatically create names for the containers based on the folder, based on the directory that you're in. So if your folder that you're working in is called this, then it should work fine. So it'll take the folder name and then the container name, which comes from the Docker Compose file. So API right here. And then a number, and that will be like how many instances of that container you have running. In this case, we just have one, so it'll be one. So we have a couple options. I'm gonna go in and change. I'm gonna update the script right here. I'll do ls, and then I'm gonna do I'm gonna use vim. And I can go in here. I'm gonna change to insert mode, so and then this is not going to be the RF wine API. I think it's just going to be wine API. Okay, I'll save that escape : WQ. And I will do Docker compose down. So here's an example of something that I just mentioned that, and I just did the same thing. So it's Docker -compose here. Okay, so now I will spin these back up. I'm going to run the script. Oops. Okay, so it ran all the migrations, and I can do Docker PS, and I can see that these are running. So now, as a final test, we'll use Postman, and we'll try to hit that container. Okay, so I get another error. So this one is a little, less obvious, but we know a few things. One, we know that our containers are running and that they can talk to each other. So on the EC2 instance, everything is basically fine. And we know that we can connect to the EC2 instance on port 8000 because we got some kind of response. But Django is actually throwing an error. And the error is disallowed host. So this is a security measure. So invalid HTTP host header, blah blah blah, and here is the host API. So it actually tells you may need to add this to allowed hosts. So you can go into settings. Here. And there is that here, allow hosts. So you can do a couple things. If you're lazy, you can do star, and that will allow anything, or you can specify the IP address. So I'm just going to do this. And then we're going to have to create a new commit and push it up. So git status, git add, git commit. Okay, so we've pushed up the changes to the GitHub repo. So now we're going to go Docker compose down. All right, so what should I do now? So I just made an update to the source code.
You have to migrate it?
You mean run the database migrations?
Yeah.
Don't you have to pull your commit again?
Yeah, so we didn't make any updates to the database. We updated some of the settings in the source code. So if I go to let's go into CD wines. And I'm gonna take a look at the settings. So less settings. We look at the allowed hosts. So notice that allowed hosts is still what we had before. So if we made, a bunch of other code changes, I want to make sure that I'm, the code I have locally on this EC2 instance matches what I have in my repo, the most recent version of what I have in the repo. So you do git pull. I think that should be fine. So I just made this the local version of this match what I have in the GitHub repo. Okay, so once I do that, I'm gonna go back to the root level, and then I'm gonna run everything again. And hopefully that change will have been picked up. We'll see. That happened awfully quick, so I'm skeptical, but we'll see. All right, so now I'm gonna go here and make this request again. Okay, so it did pick up the changes, and now we're allowed. The Django security stuff will allow us to make that request. So now we should be able to do the full range of stuff. So here I'm listing, this is the list view. So I'm doing get with nothing. What if I do /1? So this is a detail view. I don't have anything, so it throws an error. So we can create something. So I'm gonna make a post request /wines. It's gonna tell me we called this URL via post, but the URL doesn't end the slash. Okay, so let me do this. Get a different error. Okay, so the error is it needs some information. So I want to create a new resource. I want to create a row in the database, but I didn't tell it what to do. So what do I have to do now?
Click on body.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to supply some information. I'm going to click on body.
You can do raw JSON.
Okay, and then let's stick with text for now. We'll see what happens. Okay, so I need wine name. Price. Price is just this thing for some reason. Varietal. Description. Okay, so now I'm going to try sending this. So we get an error message back saying unsupported media type text plain in request. If we can look at the headers. So these are the headers that we sent. Content type text plain. So this is not what our API requires. So we have to change that. There's a few, you could just, change the headers manually here. That will be fine. We can also do this and it will implicitly change those headers for us. So now if I send this, I get back a result indicating that the wine was saved. If I look at the headers that I sent, content type was application JSON. Okay, so now if I make a get request to wine /1, I get this individual wine. And now if I go to all the wines, I just get same result, but this time in a list. All right, what if I want to update this wine?
Do put or a patch, depending on what you have in the API.
Okay, yeah, so we have put. It's basically the same thing, but yeah, we have put. So then I can modify this new wine updated. And we want to update this wine number 1 here. I'm going to send this. Okay, I get back a positive response. So now if I make a get request, I can see that we have the updated version. Now, what if I wanted to change the ID, for example? Right, I have these other, when I created it, I just had these 4 fields. but when I get the response, it's got these other fields on it. All right, so let's see what happens if I do this. Okay. So now I'm gonna make a GET request here. To 1, but notice, let me see if I go to 3, I get an error. So I said to update it to be an ID of 3, but it didn't actually do that. So why didn't it do that? Let's go into the source code. We can look at the serializers and notice ID and created at have this read only equals true keyword argument. So this is just a way of saying you as a consumer don't get to change this. So you can look at it, but you can't actually modify it. So the database handles creating the ID, and you're not allowed to change that. You're not allowed to update it. And the created at also gets automatically created by the database. So you can control, what is included in the response, and then also if that feels allowed to be modified. So this update method handles that as well. So here we only care about wine name, price, varietal, and then the instance ID. This is actually it's just going to come from the same thing. So we're not actually allowed to update this from the API. That's pretty much it. Oh yeah, we could also delete it. So we go use the delete. Okay. So these are all responses that we have decided to give in the API. So looking at the views again, when you delete, it gets deleted, and then we send this message back. So that's where this message is coming from. If we try to go to make a GET request to the same wine, we get an error. All right, that's basically it. Are there any questions? Okay, I will stop this.